DAI, and I'm just starting for the first time, and I want to create a usable liquid market where you can trade DAI against ETH. Well, I'd have to take like 1 ETH, let's say ETH's worth $2,000, and use it to mint 1,000 DAI. And then I take that 1,000 DAI and I put it into a pool with another $1,000 to create this pool where you can only buy like $10 worth or $50 worth before I push the price away from the peg. So I basically taken $20 to create a pool with $1,000 of DAI in it. And my liquidity range here, I don't know if this is going to translate over voice very well, but the amount that I can trade against that pool is pretty limited. What you guys are doing here is if I can specify a range where I say, hey, this pool is only going to be between 98 cents and 101, then I can have like, I don't know, like a 50x or 100x capital improvement in terms of the liquidity I can provide per dollar. So I look at this as being the kind of thing that you're going to have way deeper liquidity in like synthetic assets and in other types of tokens and products that are created by just being more capital efficient. And I'm not sure that the whole community has woken up to just how wild this is for DeFi as a whole. So that's me showing.
Agreed and well said. I don't know if I even. Yeah, I don't know if I can say it better. I think you said it quite well. Something that's just very interesting is definitely that, kind of the way you described it, where if you make your DAI, you start off with some DAI and then you have to get some ETH. There is something really nice about kind of being able to start out with just one asset and sort of construct what the curve looks like from some sort of floor price, if that makes sense. Where you could kind of start out with one asset and slowly convert into the other asset, and then you're sort of a more traditional market maker. There's something really powerful there that I'm really excited for.
Yeah, totally.
It does also extend beyond sort of the crypto asset class as well. Stable coins now have a huge presence in our ecosystem, and it's sort of inevitable that different denominations will be issued as well. But yeah, I like to think that V3 serves as sort of a natural venue for those types of trades.
I'm actually really curious how V3 is going to contribute to the stability of decentralized stablecoins like DAI, right? Because DAI has always had a supply problem in times of everyone wanting to have a lot of DAI, and a lot of that I think has been due to the inefficiency of Uniswap curve, right? Because the price is just distributed so widely. I just think it's really going to be interesting to see what happens to these stablecoins and how much more effective they're going to be when there's actually a real ability to maintain price stability within a certain range.
Ashley, have you that's a very, very real point. One of the examples, like I got this from Alex Evans, to give him credit, but if you look, for example, at SUSD, the synthetic stablecoin, it wasn't that close to the peg until they created the curve pool that was SUSD, USDT, USDC, and then it just totally zeroed at like hitting the dollar peg almost perfectly, because you had this correlation. Basically, the curve pool, which is like, again, as Hayden will tell us, so like Uniswap can outperform it, but it's just a constrained liquidity, a tight bounded Uniswap pool, Uniswap V3 pool now. That curve pool created this correlation between SUSD and USDT, and it like immediately pegged this other synthetic to these other stable coins. And so I think you're totally right that you now have this ability for all of these other synthetic assets or kind of decentralized stable coins to get pinned to their centralized stablecoin counterparts in a way that's going to be really interesting for DeFi as a whole.
Very interesting for DeFi. And it also, like, one of the second order effects of this is that it actually gives a lot more flexibility to things like algorithmic stablecoins. Because if you do have this sort of like inherent peg that's built into the market structure, you can sort of experiment with different types of governance systems, different types of curves and algorithms that you couldn't really do if you had to maintain a very strict market structure in a V2 world, for example. So I just think it's going to be very interesting, and it's going to provide a lot more flexibility and freedom for stablecoin experimentation. And I don't think we've arrived at like the perfect formula for a decentralized stablecoin yet.
And besides just stablecoins, for protocol level experimentation with creating markets for assets, right? Beyond just like, stable coins, I think you have a huge design space for, protocols, whether it's MakerDAO, whether it's Compound, to at the protocol level basically have resting orders or predefined liquidity for certain situations.
Yeah, Robert, like the ability to do this in a capital efficient way is what makes this possible, right? Like, I'll ask you this question, right? Because what's the difference between V2 and V3 in those answers? I think what you're going to say is that in V2 it's too capital efficient to make a usable market.
Right, you can't actually create liquidity for like tail scenarios, right? You'd have to reserve a massive amount of liquidity and create an actual trading pair for, the current market price, as opposed to saying, Maker could come up with a market where it's willing to sell DAI, at any price above 102, right? Or buy it below 98 cents, or do things that, you don't really have to reserve much liquidity for ahead of time, especially not two-sided.
Yeah, totally. The other thing I was thinking about is like treasury management for a lot of these DeFi protocols, and doing interesting treasury management techniques where they could insert range. What are you calling them? Hidden range orders?
Yeah, range orders.
Yeah, so treasuries could insert range orders above the market to kind of get liquidity as their protocol outperforms, or things like that.
There's something really interesting there. I've been thinking about a lot as well. To be honest, I just think about Uniswap a lot. That's an understatement, but you could imagine someone basically setting their entire profit-taking strategy from day one. You could basically say, let's say some protocol, has some token and they have some sort of treasury, and they want to, they want to have a sort of, they basically want to pre-commit to when they're taking profits. They could essentially, put their entire treasury in a liquidity pool on Uniswap V3, but maybe disproportionately put a huge amount of it at very high prices, where they'll only see profits on it in a world where the price massively goes up. I'm still kind of in early stage thinking about this, so I don't know if I have like really strong opinions or convictions on this, but there is something really interesting there where, you could put a quarter of your treasury at a, in the range of 100x to 1000x. You could put another quarter in the range of 1000x to 10,000x. And so you could actually just like pre-commit your treasury to like taking profits at some massive, at various price increases. And there's something pretty interesting there to me.
It's almost like an at the money offering. As far as treasury management goes as well, beyond some of these more sophisticated range orders, just going back to Hart's earlier comments, you can really think of these LP positions as a new type of asset class, and perhaps more so than Bitcoin. I think LP positions have very interesting uncorrelated returns. There's a story that Dan really likes to tell about the events of March 12th, 2020, that maybe I'll let him recount to the audience.
Oh yeah, so that was about like the worst day you could imagine for impermanent loss, you would think. But it turned out that ETH DAI liquidity providers, and this is when ETH dropped by 30%, and it turned out that over the course of that day, ETH DAI liquidity providers actually booked a profit relative to if they just held the assets outside of Uniswap, because the volume as a result of the volatility was so much higher. And so that's pretty exciting, because market makers just make a lot of money when there's a lot of volatility. And so this concept that you're actually getting run over by every trader, it's like, yeah, you're laughing all the way to the bank, basically. This is not investment advice. None of this is investment advice. Certainly, nothing that Fred or I say is. I should have probably said that up front.
What's something you guys believe about Uniswap that normally sounds a little too crazy to say out loud?
I
Where do we
need to know
even
if I
start?
should.
There's
I don't know if I should
many.
give mine.
Well, just following from that, I guess I'll attempt one, which is that every S&P 500 company should have LP tokens on its balance sheet. LP tokens
in what?
In whatever they want, but
just because it's an uncorrelated asset.
Yeah, for portfolio construction purposes.
I think a lot of my philosophy sort of stems from this maybe subconscious idea that the existence of exchanges other than Uniswap is a bug, and ultimately it's a bug in Uniswap. It's a bug. It means that Uniswap hasn't fulfilled its full destiny.
That sounds
like
really are
maximalism
maximalists. Jesus.
Yes, nice to meet you, Fred.
How's it going?
But if other people want to answer that, I do want to introduce Ken, who's up here. Hi, Ken. How are you doing?
Hi.
So
long time fan.
Yeah. So Ken, I met way back a few months before, or by month I mean like almost a full year before the Uniswap V1 launch. Back when, and he was managing the Ethereum Foundation grants program. And he was the person I talked to when I was applying for an Ethereum Foundation grant for Uniswap V1, and he was one of the people who kind of helped award it. And so kind of coming full circle, recently the first Uniswap governance proposal that passed was the creation of a grants program, and Ken is leading that program. And so recently they just came out with their first wave of grants. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I guess I'd be curious to hear a little bit about how you're thinking about the Uniswap grants program, and also sort of what you've been funding and how it's been going.
Yeah, I guess you put me on the spot. But no, this is super cool. Thanks for having me. What I'm super stoked for is the fact that there's not been a precedent set, the fact that there's so much at hand, just that hasn't been like scraped, right? So earlier we talked a little bit about treasury management, how much you can do with V3 and sort of LPing, but what about the treasury sitting in the community, right? Like there's so many treasury management strategies that have yet to come forward. So at least for this first round of grants, or this first wave or whatever, the one thing I wanted to be highly cognizant of, and something that we thought about a lot at the EF, was this idea of second order effects, right? What can this lead to, and sort of like what do these grants actually tell the I guess the mission of, and what does this actually do when you do award a grant, right? Does this actually, like, if you fund something, does this actually create chilling effects for the next team that's building something similar or something related? And I think there's a lot of concern over, like, especially when we have these conversations, it's a lot about like, what do you think is going to be successful for Uniswap? What do you think Uniswap looks like in 5 years? I have no idea what Uniswap will look in 5 years. In 2018, when Hayden came up with this idea, and I talked to Carl and Vitalik about it, we had no idea that this was going to happen. We had no idea that there was going to be like all of these projects built on top of Uniswap, DEX aggregators like Slingshot, and then all these other things like kind of coming at each other. This is, none of these could have been expected. But I think the most important thing that we can do here, especially with this limited budget, is to be able to set forward the idea that we just don't know, and we have to experiment, right? So if you look at sort of the list of grantees, what I'm really excited for are these ideas of subcommittees of, one, obviously treasury management, because what is it going to look like when you have a multi-sig or a DAO even that manages $50 million of Uniswap treasury? How do you diversify that? Are there aggressive strategies? Are there conservative strategies? What if we just hold it all in the stable? And watching it all play out in real time, right? Like, this is so much fun to think about. And more than that, we can think about sort of this idea of this next level sort of like engagement of governance, right? Because when we think about token holders, we don't necessarily, or at least like, if you look at sort of the discourse in the forums and on Twitter, a lot of it has been about like, let's maximize LP returns, let's do X, Y, Z. But we don't think, about what this actually means when we consider delegates, about having technical debates, and really think more critically about the kind of deliberate conversations we're having on what this can lead to, right? Who else we're bringing into the community. As Ashley mentioned, right, there are a wide age group, range of age groups that are participating in the Discord actively. How do we pull them in? How do we make sure they're recognized? And as the Uniswap product, or I guess Uniswap core product, sort of evolves, everything else sort of sits in its own little solar system, I want to say, in this giant galaxy that's Uniswap of documentation, education, all of that, and then you also have governance, so civil and everything around that. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's just really exciting to think about this, like this all these like constellations sort of building around each other, and it all started with one grant.
That's got to be one of the most effective. Yeah, I don't mean to put you on the spot with this question, but that's got to be one of the most effective grants that the Ethereum Foundation, certainly at its size, that the Ethereum Foundation gave out.
Not effective, Dan. Capital efficient.
Nice one, too.
Yeah. So
I actually just want to just really quick.
Go ahead.
I just want to say that I think that like I was actually talking to a lot of people, given that COVID is sort of coming to an end, and I've been sort of just planning on seeing people I haven't seen in a while. I've just been speaking a lot more with friends who have been sort of falling out of touch, and it's just funny to think how foreign crypto seems and how inaccessible it still seems, despite the recent rise in popularity. And I think that like your story, Hayden, and the success of Uniswap in the short 2 years that it's been in existence is just really incredible. And I think that I always emphasize to people that I'm telling about the space, just how open it really is if you're just willing to sort of put the time in. And these things are so new, and these we're extolling the virtues of V3, and like we just came up with V3 sort of on the spot, like as a collective exercise for the past year and a half. And so I definitely think that there's a lot more space than people realize, and it's hard to understand that unless you sort of step outside the bubble. And so I just wanted to emphasize to anyone who's listening, or to if you have friends who are sort of thinking about jumping in, it just couldn't be clearer to me that this is such an exciting space to be in, and I just sort of want to share that with people that are maybe just don't know that they would be thriving in an environment like DeFi or like crypto, but maybe they're just sort of stuck in a more traditional kind of career track or financial environment. So yeah, I guess that's just a plug to proselytize crypto and DeFi, and the space is a lot more open than it might seem.
I really love that point.
I completely agree. I feel like I always harp on this sort of maybe on Twitter and elsewhere, but if you're interested in doing this, like, come join us. I think my story and certainly Hayden's story are all stories of people who were definitely not doing this and then started doing it to great effects. And I just think it's really easy to jump in. It's very, very welcoming community. It's super easy to get started. I know people always love to hear about how Hayden got started with it, but it really just takes an interest and starting to learn about something.
I mean, even Dan's story. Dan was a lawyer a few years before he got into crypto. He's only been in crypto for so many years. Yeah, definitely. The more time you spend in the space, the more people you meet in the space, the more people you met who were who kind of have these awesome stories where they kind of got into crypto and suddenly they find what they're passionate for, and they're building something and having an impact. And I think that we're seeing that. I don't think that my story is unique in the space necessarily. I mean, it's unique in its own way, but there's there's so many people across this space with their own stories, and it's really great, and that's one of the things I love the most about working in DeFi.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love how like people are so generous with their time in the whole industry and in the community. I feel like, you know, it's not like a normal job where it's sort of cutthroat and everyone is fend for themselves. It's very much like, come join us. We need every hand we can get, and everyone will teach you what they know if you're willing to sit there and listen. So if you're interested, yeah, find a way to get in. Come hang out with us.
Can I also just shill grants really quickly? Just like, you know,
please, yes.
I think you've earned it.
I think, you know, one of the really cool opportunities here is that, you know, DeFi is this like large, inclusive, you know, accessible platform that anyone can be a part of. But I think so far we haven't really seen that much or as much diversity as at least like I would like to see. You know, I think this provides a huge opportunity for anyone in this like 500+ person room. Like, if you have a group or you have something that you're building, some event that you're doing, you know, please apply for Uniswap grants. I think there's so much more that can be done here. And it's a very, very short form. The website is unigrants.org, and then I'll stop. Thank you.
Yeah, and then I think if you're more ambitious, there is Uni governance is on chain. Anyone can create a proposal by getting enough delegates. You can create something that anyone can delegate to, an autonomous proposal, which is something that Robert and Compound developed for this governance system. And yeah, I think if you so definitely apply for a Uniswap grant or create your own grants committee or create your own project. I think we're very excited about seeing where governance takes Uniswap.
Right, Ken is essentially leading the first team that you know, natively working under governance. But yet there's certainly room for a lot more, you know, governance committees or governance teams of all sizes. So yeah, definitely agreed with Dan, but also apply for a grant.
Yeah,
if you want
one. And maybe just to explain, like for anyone that's listening, to just explain like what a governance team might look like. So Uniswap has, I don't actually know how much money it is at this point, but it's like several $1 billion, I think, now that's vested to it. Anyone can apply with a proposal. The proposal can be anything. It could be something like, you know, we want to create a giving team that is doing, you know, giving on behalf of the Uniswap, or we want to create a special projects team that focuses on public art, or it could be something focused on, you know, like we have in the Uniswap grants, hacks and people who are focused on building things that are built on top of the Uniswap network. It's pretty much innumerable, the things you could do that could be involved in Uniswap. You just simply apply or not submit a proposal. I mean, not apply. Everyone has to vote on it. But if you ever have any questions about that, you can come to our Discord and go to the governance channel, and anyone that is there will answer them. So if you have anything that you think could benefit the Uniswap ecosystem, please come by and we would love to talk to you about it.
Yeah. You know, one thing that we've been working on and thinking about a lot is how to make stuff like governance proposals a lot more accessible and easy. Because, you know, there is sort of this like technical element to creating a governance proposal, because governance proposals are, you know, on-chain code essentially that gets voted on. There is like this sort of slight technical overhead, and I think it's not so extreme. A lot of people can do it, but we have been, you know, something we've been thinking a lot. We've started to experiment, you know, with the Sybil project, but we're kind of continuing to experiment. Is, you know, can we make interfaces for people submitting governance proposals, for kind of engaging in sort of common governance actions, so that they don't necessarily need to have the technical capability of creating the proposal. And so that's another thing that I'm really excited about for this upcoming year.
So Hayden, you mentioned you were planning to launch on Optimism soon after, which is Ethereum scaling solution. I'm curious about the logic behind what got you excited about that.
Yeah, I think what excites me about Optimism and optimistic rollups, you know, we've had sort of, I guess the L2, the history of L2 research is a long one, and I'm definitely not going to recap it. But, you know, something that has always sort of plagued L2 designs, whether it was state channels or plasma or all these different things that were happening. The idea of there were sort of these core elements to Ethereum that they didn't quite nail down, right? Which was composability, the ability to execute arbitrary smart contracts, the ability to kind of interoperate between multiple applications, the kind of these sorts of things. A lot of the earlier L2s didn't have them, and what excited me so much about optimistic rollups when the design were first sort of being discussed was the fact that it was the first L2 solution that kind of nailed all of those, or that checked all of those boxes. I think that we've also sort of had so that's what really excited me early on. And then I think that's something that's kind of especially exciting about optimism, sort of in terms of how it evolved, is the fact that it's essentially just an Ethereum, it's a guest fork, and so not only is it full smart contracts and feels very much like Ethereum, but it gets to use all the same infrastructure that Ethereum already has. So you don't necessarily need to kind of rebuild, something that a lot of like other blockchains or especially like L1s and stuff struggle with, is that they have to like rebuild all the infrastructure components. And something that's nice about Optimism is that it can kind of natively make use of all that infrastructure. And then of course the last point that I'll make is that what I like about it is that it's built on Ethereum, and it's not, it still makes usage of kind of Ethereum security, and is more a way of scaling that up than kind of a lot of sort of other paths towards scaling tend to be side chains or other L1s, and usually the way that they achieve scale is kind of making a trade-off between security and scalability. And I think that there's definitely still trade-offs involved with L2s, but there is something. But when you're building on an optimistic rollup on Ethereum, there's something really nice about the fact that you can fully benefit, or you can make you can make use of the Ethereum's native security properties, and kind of piggyback off of them. So anyway, that's what excites me about it personally.
Yeah, I do think you've always been an Ethereum maximalist, at least since I've known you. And not, I think, even for ideological reasons, but for very practical ones. And I know that's something that's very important to you and the Uniswap team. I kind of want to put Robert on the spot, because Robert has an approach to scaling with Compound that I'd like to hear him to talk about.
Sure. This is the Uniswap Plus Paradigm V3 talk, so I don't want to detour us too much. But one of the things that we're doing at Compound is we're building a system that creates one large compound interest rate market with assets from any chain. So if you imagine Compound as like, a website where you can supply assets and earn an interest rate or borrow other assets, we're building a system that basically goes to any chain and allows you to supply the assets and earn interest and borrow other assets. So it'll support all of the Ethereum assets that we're all familiar with, but it can also plug in assets from Polkadot. It could even plug in assets from Polkadot, from Optimism. We could create a bridge to Compound, we'll call it V3 metaphorically, to really anywhere. It could be, even Optimism where Uniswap is, right? And it creates basically one compound connected to many chains instead of mini compounds on every chain, which is a big differentiation in my mind. And it's being run as a standalone ledger with its own validators, governed by comp token holders on Ethereum. So it's a radical experiment in architecture, which I don't think anyone has approached before, leveraging a lot of the best work that the community of Compound has already created. So the design space was, well, how do we leverage Compound governance? How do we leverage all the tooling? How do we leverage that for governance? How do we leverage that process that already has oversight of $12 billion to basically by design create security guarantees for a new ledger? So there's a lot of experiments and firsts, which I think we're going to come out with in the next couple months. But it's called Compound Gateway. You can visit compound.cash to learn more. If you like to run hardware and software, become a validator. It'll be super profitable. And if you like building cool stuff and you're not a validator, check it out anyway. And if you're a user, it'll feel just like Compound. So it's going to be a good couple months.
Compound V3.
V3.
Yeah, I give a lot of projects sometimes hard times for not being as either Ethereum centric or as purist in smart contract security as Uniswap is. But there is something sort of magical about the core idea that Uniswap is built around that sort of lets it be this particular way that it is, where it can be immutable forever, where it can be really fully deterministic and path invariant. And I think we're pushing that to the limits. But so far, at least, it's felt like it's the right choice to not make the core contracts upgradable, for example. And yeah, I'm curious just about because I think that seems like core to your philosophy.
Yeah. Well, so one thing I'll say that is kind of interesting here is, I think that for Uniswap, I think that what Compound is doing kind of works for Compound, and what Uniswap is doing kind of works for Uniswap. And the reason is that I think that Compound always, Compound is basically shared risk pools managed by comp holders, and so in that way, the assets in the protocol, right, always had this kind of reliance on comp holders to be, responsible for for example, if comp holders were to vote in a faulty oracle and a bad asset with a faulty oracle, potentially that could put other funds in the protocol at risk. And so there was sort of already this higher degree of reliance on comp holders in Compound. And so, having a chain with security kind of from comp holders sort of isn't that big a departure from what is already there, if that makes sense. And then I think that, with Uniswap, there's sort of this element where there's actually very little that uni holders can do to cause there's basically nothing that Uniswap liquidity providers can do to cause, or there's nothing that uni holders can do to cause liquidity providers on Uniswap to lose funds, right? Because it is so, automated in that way. And so there is just something interesting there where I think that the immutability, right? If I had the ability, or if Uniswap governance had the ability to kind of, take all the value outside of, all the liquidity pools, I do think that it wouldn't feel, as secure. And so I think, yeah, as it does today.
I still take some comfort in the fact that Uniswap V1 is still chugging along. And for as long as the EVM does not make some kind of serious backward incompatible upgrade, it always will be. There'll be some money always in Uniswap V1 just getting arbed blissfully. And I think
it's mostly socks right now. Funny enough,
it's mostly socks.
It's because Uniswap governance owns the socks liquidity tokens, and it hasn't migrated them. And so socks is the #1 most liquid pool on Uniswap V1 today.
Yep. So I think maybe that's a good place to end. We have been going for 90 minutes. I don't know if you have any closing thoughts. For people who haven't seen the V3 blog post and the white paper, you can go to uniswap.org. What else, Hayden? What else do you think people should do?
Well,
yeah.
Oh, I kind of want, like, Uniswap team. You guys think about this all day, every day. The public is just seeing V3 for the first time now, but you guys, I'm sure, are thinking about, like, where is this going all the time? So, like, where is all this going? Like, what's a mind blower if we're in 10 years that will have seemed to come true?
I have a few. I mean, some really simple, early mind blowers are look out for Uniswap liquidity sort of becoming the lifeblood of liquidity on every centralized exchange, and not just every crypto focused exchange, but anywhere that money moves. But I also think that one of the nice things about it is it allows a lot of types of market operations that were not previously possible, right? That's always the most exciting stuff about DeFi is not like the stuff that we're sort of replacing or replicating on chain, but it's the stuff that wasn't possible before this. And so I think there are all kinds of like real world assets that are going to start coming on chain. I think the ability in V3 to have essentially what is a limit order makes some of these types of assets much more accessible to be participating in DeFi. So, for example, real estate or accounts receivable or any kind of like tokenized financial instrument that is a real world thing. I think you're going to start seeing more stuff like that, which will be interesting.
Something I want to like highlight the first thing that Ashley said there, which was centralized exchanges. I do think that there's kind of these inherent benefits to decentralized liquidity, where in the kind of the way that I see the centralized versus decentralized exchange, thing playing out in the long run is I think, decentralized liquidity has the advantage of it always being online, right? It never goes down. It's sort of reliable and it can tap into like a much wider audience. But on the flip side, people in crypto love to tell people that they should self-custody all their assets. But I think when you talk to people, I don't think that a lot of people want to self-custody all their assets. And so but I think it is very important to give people a choice. And so, I think that that's kind of what decentralized liquidity does. People can self-custody their assets, they can trade their assets in self-custodial way. But for people who don't want that, they're going to go to decentralized exchanges. But the decentralized exchanges might not be doing their own order matching. They might not have their own liquidity sources. They might just basically be centralized, like hosted wallets that tap into Uniswap. That's kind of how I see it. I don't know if this is a spicy take with the Coinbase co-founder on here, but I do kind of in the long, like that's kind of my, I think that Coinbase is going to be around for a very long time, but I kind of think that the liquidity that it uses is going to be something that looks like Uniswap.
Right. In the future, Coinbase is going to be a hosted Uniswap front end?
Yes.
Fred,
Maybe.
please weigh in, Fred. Please, we're begging you.
No. Hayden, let's just say this before Fred does. Coinbase just becomes purely a fiat on-ramp and on-ramp, and they actually just deprecate Coinbase Pro and just use Uniswap.
Well, no. I actually no. That's but my point is that I don't think that it becomes just an on or off ramp because I don't think people want to self-custody all their crypto either. Yeah.
Thankfully, we're in a quiet period, so legally I cannot comment on this line of questioning.
How convenient, Fred.
I'll add 2 10-year predictions. One is that Uni will replace the US dollar as the global reserve currency. Second one is that
I'm going to invite Marvin up so he can yell at you.
Yeah, sorry, not financial advice. Secondly, I do think that one of the things that blockchains enable is this sort of hyper securitization, and we're definitely seeing that right now with sort of the excitement around NFTs and these creator economies, and Uniswap is sort of just the natural venue for these types of assets to trade on. So yeah, everything becomes securitized and everything trades on Uniswap.
Cool. With that, I think we've been going 90 minutes. Sorry, Robert.
I was just going to say V3.
I think everyone feels that. I think everyone's been saying that. So yeah, V3. Cool. I'll reach out to me if you have any questions on AMMs. I love to talk about it. I love to talk V3. I'm very excited. And thanks everyone for coming on. Hayden, any last words?
Nope. I mean, yeah, I don't know. Nope.
Cool. All right.
Thanks for hosting. And thanks everyone for joining. That's my last words.
Pleasure to have you on. Bye.
Thank you.
See y'all.
Bye, everyone.